I thank the gentleman from Wisconsin for yielding time, and we'll continue to engage in that. And with the permission of the gentleman from Wisconsin, I'd like to ask that he would also yield time to the gentleman from Virginia to engage in colloquy.
Very good.
The gentleman from Wisconsin controls the time.
Right.
Understood from the speaker, and appreciate the time from the gentleman from Wisconsin, and his commitment to fighting to change this town, which unfortunately too many of our colleagues are unwilling to do. And glad to have my friend from Virginia here as well. Yesterday we had a interesting exchange in the House Judiciary Committee, and we had a number of different conversations about the issue of the ongoing threat at our border. And I know that my friend from Virginia also was down here on the floor of the House last night, where we had a continued conversation about the ongoing threat at the southern border of the United States. And I would imagine that I should use the microphone. I think that's what I imagine. I would imagine that the people that I represent and the people of the state of Texas would be horrified if they all got to see what I see every day in the exchange with my colleagues here in this body about what's actually happening at our border. And what do I mean by that? Yesterday I had an exchange with the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, because I was acknowledging, in the context of a debate we were having about opening up visa waivers for the United States Virgin Islands, that those kinds of waivers have been abused in Guam and other territories of the United States. So we were questioning, wait a second, why are we going to open up visa waivers while our border is wide open? And I pointed out the abuses that are happening at our border, the abuses that are happening in Texas. And I very specifically talked about the sexual abuses, the rapes, the tragedy of what is occurring to little girls and to people on the journey, and in particularly in Texas when they cross the southern border because of the hands of the dangerous cartels. And I said this at the time, that the committee chairman kind of scoffed. And it wasn't the first time I'd seen some of my colleagues scoff with respect to the perspectives that we are offering about what we see every day in the conversations we have with people on the ground. And so what I think it merits conversation here on the floor of the House is, on behalf of the American people, and I want to get the gentleman from Virginia's perspective on this, on behalf of the American people that we represent, people of the Commonwealth of Virginia, people of the state of Texas, the many people we represent, that we're trying to articulate for a body of representatives of those people that their lives are being impacted and harmed by virtue of the refusal of this administration and, frankly, many of the people of this chamber to secure the border of the United States. And in very short outline form, that it comes in the form of empowered cartels, dangerous individuals crossing our border, be they criminals or be they terrorist members, be they folks from state sponsors of terror. It comes in the form of dangerous fentanyl and narcotics coming into our communities, poisoning our families, poisoning our young, killing people in schools. It comes in the form of physical property damage to ranchers, business owners, people dealing with the dangerous flow coming across the border. It comes in the form of economic impacts and devastation. It comes in the form of, for example, the town of Uvalde, Texas, where you have 100 a day being dropped off, and they have to deal with, what do we do? Do we ship them to San Antonio? What do we do with our schools? What do we do with our hospitals? It comes in the form of danger because Border Patrol can't monitor the border and people come in, known gotaways. And then it comes in the form of having criminals that exist in the United States that aren't being prosecuted because allegedly we don't have bed space, but really we're not allowing ICE to do its job. So you have, for example, 25,000 prosecutions last year as opposed to something like 250,000 at the peak of the Trump administration. I could go on and on and on. My point is, there is a direct consequence and direct harm to the American people dead Americans, dead migrants, fentanyl pouring in, increased substance abuse, empowerment of cartels, empowerment of China. And this is happening on a daily basis and getting worse. And finally now we're being told, even as the Speaker of the House has COVID, and even as we're talking about, you go look at the top stories in Politico, oh my gosh, everybody's running around, there are COVID positive people in D.C. Even as all that is occurring, even as the extension of the proxy voting fraud, which it is, occurring in the House of Representatives, by fraud I mean that half this body or more is signing up and standing up at this podium every day saying, I'm not voting because of COVID, signing documentation, and we know the vast majority it has nothing to do with COVID.
So in addition to showing up here, or not showing up here to do the job that your constituents sent you here to do, they're literally lying about the reason they're not here.
Well, the gentleman from Virginia, the form that I've never proxy voted, but there's some sort of form, and you sign the form, and in that language you say, due to the COVID emergency, or something to that effect, I don't want to misrepresent the exact legal language, due to the COVID emergency, I cannot be here to vote. So I am allowing so-and-so colleague to vote for me.
I've been tempted to interrupt during the proxy voting to ask the Speaker to allow me to offer a prayer for the healing and the recovery of the dozens of members of Congress who are not at work and who are apparently too sick from COVID to show up and do their job.
And given that we have lines and lines of people voting by proxy, given that we have the Speaker of the House having COVID, given that Politico is writing stories about how COVID's impacting the swamp, given that you have to wear a mask on airplanes, given that we're continuing to require members of our military to get a needle stuck in their arm or potentially lose their job, given that we're continuing to require among federal workers like Border Patrol that they get a needle in their arm or lose their job, then comes along the infinite wisdom of the CDC director and the head of DHS, Secretary Mayorkas. Oh, let's get rid of Title 42.
Of course.
The literal only thing that is actually being used to enforce the border and stop half the flow of people coming at our border.
Well, that's why they are getting rid of it, because it has been used to turn back some illegal immigrants at the border.
And is the gentleman aware of this? Did we take a trip together to Del Rio, Texas a month ago?
We did. Del Rio, Texas, where just a couple of months ago you had Bidentown with some 20,000 illegal Haitian immigrants gathered under the bridge. And we learned while we were there, and thank you for leading that trip. And I also just want to say thank you to my friend, the congressman from Wisconsin, for allowing us to do this, and Mr. Congressman Roy for allowing me to join you. But you had the 20,000 illegal Haitian immigrants gathered in Bidentown under the bridge, which they quickly, they weren't concerned that the immigrants were coming into the country illegal. They were concerned about the image and the embarrassment of 20,000 of them under Biden's village there under the bridge. So they wanted to distribute them into the interior of the country as quickly as they could to hide it from the American. Remember, at first they tried to keep the media from covering it. And then what they did was bust them into the country to wherever they wanted to go. They flew a few back to Haiti, but most of them they distributed them to the country. But we learned when we were in Del Rio, and you may have already known this, I learned that day when we were there, that there's 1,000 a day coming just through that corridor. Now, sadly, that's just a fraction of the 7,000 a day that are coming across the southern border along Arizona, New Mexico, California, and, of course, Texas. But this president's policies now, what's the response? We want to try to double or even triple that by rescinding Title 42.
Does the gentleman remember that we stood at the river in Del Rio of the river? We stood at the river, and we were there at the spot where many thousands of Haitians had crossed last September.
Right.
Does the gentleman remember that?
That's right.
Is the gentleman aware of whether or not the Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, or, for example, the White House Secretary, Jen Psaki, quickly en route to a deal with MSNBC, President Joe Biden, or any other member of the administration that went to the microphones and accused Border Patrol agents lifetime public servants serving on our border, of whipping human beings in the river, are you aware of any of those individuals apologizing to them and ensuring that they've been reposted in their jobs on horseback in Del Rio?
Not aware that they've apologized. Matter of fact, at least the president and the vice president, to my knowledge, have never been to the border to see what's happening. Again, you led one of the trips I was on. I've been to the border 4 times in my first 15 months here in Congress so that I could see better and experience in person the crisis at the border, to see the human toll, to see the environmental toll, and then exactly to see where that was happening, where those Border Patrol officers who are trying to stand in the gap, to be on the front line, trying to do their job despite the efforts of this administration to prevent them from doing their job, putting their lives literally at risk. The previous time I was at the border, not the Del Rio trip, but the previous time I was in Arizona, there was actually a shooting of a Border Patrol officer while I was there. And yet here we've got, as you said, the Department of Homeland Security Secretary besmirching, smearing, demeaning his own employees, knowing full well that's a lie, knowing full well they're just leading those horses as they do, and trying to protect us, American citizens, from what's happening at the border.
And to make sure the record is clear, I think the gentleman is correct that neither the president nor the vice president have been to the border in what I would call the spots where it matters. I believe the vice president of the United States did take a trip where she hopped through El Paso, met with a number of folks away from the border, went to the border for a quick photo, went back to El Paso, hopped on a plane en route to California. I believe that transpired sometime last year, but never to Del Rio, never meeting with people right down on the river, never down to McAllen, never to Laredo, never to go talk to any of the people being affected directly by what's occurring at the border. Neither the so-called border czar, the vice president, nor the president of the United States. And to be clear, the Secretary of Homeland Security has only been there, I think, a couple of times. And when attending, I do not believe was received particularly well by the line Border Patrol. Does the gentleman agree?
That's right. They say they want to identify the root causes. I can tell you what the root causes are. The root causes of the massive surge across our border, if you will, the invasion at our border, is the cessation of the Trump policies that were working. It's the enhancement of catch and release practice. It's ending MPP. It's stopping building the wall. It's promising amnesty and an open border during the 2020 election till illegals come. That's why they were coming with their Biden T-shirts on. It's not mandating E-Verify. It's allowing the economic incentive to come. It's allowing individuals to come and be apprehended and provided free social services, free health care services, free education, and to be flown or distributed wherever they want to go around the country at taxpayer expense with no specific court date to even appear to have their case heard. And I want to compliment your governor from yesterday. I hope that he'll follow through on this. I hope this will actually happen. Perhaps you've got some thoughts on that. That he announced yesterday that he's going to bus these illegal aliens right here to Washington, D.C., so our Democrat majority and our Democrat administration, who is willfully, purposefully facilitating this invasion at our southern border through their policies, can accommodate these illegal aliens when they're brought here. I call on my governor from Virginia and governors throughout the country to do the same thing.
Well, I appreciate the observation by my friend from Virginia about what the governor of Texas is having to do to stand in the breach and to stand up in order to protect Texans in the complete and total absence of the federal government to do its constitutional duty.
That's right.
To defend the sovereign nation, to deal with immigration, which it refuses to do. I would note that the governor has, the legislature has appropriated $3 billion in Texas. I don't know when we're going to get that paid back by this august institution when Texas is doing the job of the federal government. But okay, we're a border state. Texas funded $3 billion, and we've used that to take our DPS agents and DPS troopers and move them down to the border to be able to back up Border Patrol, as the gentleman knows from our experience down there and meeting with DPS, and has now been engaging in policy and building fences and other stuff, and now engaging in a policy shift where there's going to be some action with respect to vehicle inspections at ports of entry. I applaud that. I would note that I would go so far as to say and would support the governor shutting down I-35.
Absolutely.
I would just shut down the port of entry. I would look at the rest of America and my colleagues around this chamber and I'd say, you like your cheap goods from Mexico right now while we've got high inflation and we want to go attack China? Guess what? I-35 is shut down. Shut down until you secure the border of the United States. But I appreciate that the governor's step is a step in that direction to say we're going to have vehicle inspections. I hope they are long, slow vehicle inspections. I hope they cover every car from beginning to end and take plenty of time doing it. Secondly, using boats and having some sort of ability to deter crossing. There's some plan to do that. I haven't read the details of it. I hope it is sincere and robust. And then the third part is what you mentioned, taking some of those that are dumped off by Border Patrol in Texas, putting them on a bus, and shipping them to the front door of this building. I support that. A couple of caveats. There is one metric, and one metric alone, that I will hold everybody in this chamber accountable to, the governor of Texas accountable to, the president of the United States accountable. Stop the flow now.
That's right.
That is your job. That is your duty under the Constitution. That is what the law requires you to do. That is why we have the Secure Fence Act. That is why we have laws on the books requiring you to follow the legal processes. Do not allow the false name of asylum and compassion to be used as a rule to swallow the constitutional duty to secure the border. And I would give the same speech to the governor and to my colleagues in the legislature in Texas. You have a duty to the people of Texas to secure the border. And under Article 4, there's an invasion and the federal government is not doing its job. You have a duty to hold that line. So that is the metric by which we should grade the actions of the governor, or the actions of this body, or the actions of the president. I'd see if the gentleman would agree.
Absolutely. And the 4 times that I've been to the board in the last 15 months, I've never seen a Democrat there. And I've had Border Patrol, Texas State Police, sheriffs, law enforcement who's working there at the border, not just Texas, but Arizona as well, where I've been, tell me they never see Democrats at the border. We only need 7 Democrats to join our discharge petition to get a vote on reinstate or maintaining Title 42. But we can't get one Democrat, one majority member to do this. One would hope that just in the state of Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, California, the border states, that we could get, just in the state of Texas in particular, that we could get Democrats to say, hey, don't mess with Texas. And we're going to join our fellow Republicans and we're going to support Texas's efforts to stand in the gap and do what the federal government will not do in violation of the Constitution in protecting the state from invasion.
I really appreciate my friend from Virginia pointing this out. And let me note that we're sitting here on April, I believe, 7th. Actually, it's a couple of good friends of my birthday. I'm just glad I said that out loud.
Happy birthday to my brother Steve, who's 55 today, April 7th.
I know. I will not mention these 2 guys happen to be known publicly, but they're a couple of twins who are buddies of mine, and their birthdays today, having said that out loud. But I sit here and I say on April 7th, it was a year ago almost to the day. I'd have to go look at the date of the filing of our discharge petition down at the desk here in the chamber that I filed on behalf of us who wanted to do it, and our friend Yvette Harrell, who had legislation to require the enforcement of Title 42, the health code provision that allows you to turn people away because of communicable diseases, which of course we're dealing with during COVID. And she had a bill that she filed last February. Now keep in mind, that was only a month into the administration. But we knew full well what was happening because immigrants were showing up to the border with Joe Biden t-shirts and with thank you to President Joe Biden shirts. So we knew what was coming. We knew that the members of this chamber and our Democrats, friends in the administration, would say, oh, well, I don't know if we need to use Title 42 enforcement. I don't know if we need to use migrant protection protocols and return to Mexico. Because frankly, we knew they'd be fine with a flood across our border.
That's right.
So we filed a discharge petition of that bill. Now, I want a little history here for 1 minute. We introduced that discharge petition, and we got our normal group of members, like to fight for freedom. We had 30 or 40 of us get on that discharge right away. And then it was a slog. It was a slog for the better part of a year. We tried in the summer. We get it at 75. Went on Tucker Carlson. Said, hey, here are the people who have signed it. Here are the ones who haven't.
Names.
Suddenly that list grew to about 125. Well, then what? We did a little bit longer. Went back on Tucker. Went back. Hey, here's what the list number is. Suddenly that number grew to about 160. We got it up to 195, and then it stalled. Well, then 2 weeks ago, when all of the Title 40 news started breaking, that the CDC director and all of her infinite wisdom, I'm not going to go down that rabbit trail at the moment, and the Department of Homeland Security secretary are like, oh yeah, we're not going to do Title 42 anymore. All of a sudden people around here go, whoa, well that'll be a thing. I'm like, well I knew it was a thing a year ago. You knew it was a thing a year ago. You've been to the border 4 times in your brief tenure. I live 100 miles from the border. Well, my district's 100 miles from the border. And so we get this discharge petition. Now we've got it. We've got 210, I think, give or take one, signatures on that, all Republicans. Not one Democratic colleague has yet to sign it.
Not one.
Yet there are 4 Democratic senators, right? Senator Manchin, Senator Mark Kelly, Senator Kirsten Sinema, Senator John Tester, who have all said, hey, we shouldn't be getting rid of Title 42. Can my friend from Virginia explain, while not one member, even from a border state, of our Democratic colleagues will sign that discharge petition?
No excuse for it. If this president was doing everything else right, use your imagination, just allow for a moment. This president was doing everything else right and some of his other policies were working. Let's just pretend some were working. What he has allowed to happen at the border as the head of the Democrat Party. Never in the history of the country has our own president done more to intentionally harm the United States than what he's done in his first year. So it's no wonder that not one Democrat will join us in standing up for border security. How did that become a partisan issue? As you know, we were in an off-the-record meeting with Secretary Mayorkas, so I can't share what he said.
Keep it off the record.
But as you know, I can share what I said. I asked him, what's the end game?
Right.
Here we're going to take it from some 7,000 a day, it's estimated at 18,000 a day. That means every 3 days, you'll have the equivalent population of my home county, Campbell County, Virginia, 56,000 people. In 3 days, we'll have that many illegal border crossings. And by the way, in my hometown of Lynchburg, Virginia, right outside Campbell County there, we just had a murder conviction of an MS-13 gang member who came across illegally, again, but demonstrating that every town is a border town under this president. Every state is a border state under this president. I appreciate you leading on this issue, Chip, so passionately and so consistently and so faithfully. And specifically, you helped lead that letter that we sent to leadership of both the House and the Senate on the Republican side just 2 or 3 weeks ago, saying no Republican should support any government funding that does not secure the border. So what did we do with the potential leverage that we had that was before us, if all Republicans would refuse to fund a government that doesn't secure the border?
Well, like any good Republican conference, we did nothing. We did nothing. We let the moments of leverage just pass right on by and did nothing. And yet I sat here on the floor while I had some of my Republican leadership colleagues saying, we got all this great stuff. Can you believe what we got? We got the Hyde Amendment. It's like, you're supposed to get the Hyde Amendment. It's been law for 35 years. Just because Democrats say they're not going to use it, you go, don't worry, we got the Hyde Amendment. And then you pat yourself on the back.
1.6 trillion, less than 1% of which was for Ukraine support. Some, of course, justified their vote for that because of supporting Ukraine. So 99% of the bill had nothing to do with Ukraine. And yet 54 Republicans, 1/4 of our body, voted against that $1.6 trillion spending with no leverage, no concessions, nothing really gained. We didn't secure the border. We didn't end the vaccine mandates. We didn't unleash American energy independence.
$1.6 trillion, $100 billion of plussed-up spending, $14 billion for Ukraine without a single debate here on the floor of the House about how much money we should spend, what we should get out of it. No change to the mandate of vaccines being stuck in the arms of our men and women in uniform or Border Patrol or the requirements of healthcare workers. No change on border security. None. No requirements whatsoever on border security. That's not getting a win. And now here we sit, and the gentleman raised the important question. We got about maybe 5 minutes to be respectful of our friend from Wisconsin's
Who
generous
also
time.
didn't vote for that bad bill, by
Correct.
the way.
And he understands what the swamp is all about. And I would just say, the gentleman brought up the impact. I think it's one of the most important things we can say here in closing. You brought up the impact in Lynchburg, Virginia. Okay? People think this is just a border issue and I come down here because it's Texas. Yeah, we're taking it on the chin. I have ranchers who are crying. I have people who are victims of crime. I have migrants in my district who are abused, all in the false name of compassion about open borders. And we got to sit back and we got to find dead bodies of migrants on ranches, get a morgue brought down to put 115 dead bodies in one county. And my Democratic colleagues are like, whatever, who cares? It's just some problem we just got to deal with. And that's the reality, but it stretches throughout the country.
That's right.
If the gentleman will oblige, if he agrees with these numbers, we're looking at about 1 million illegal encounters in just 6 months of this year.
That's right.
We have seen more than 6 times as many daily apprehensions since Mayorkas took office. In March alone, there were 97,000 southern border encounters. Of those, through half the month, of those, 51% were removed under Title 42. So it tells you half are being removed from Title 42 and they're about to end it. We have, Mayorkas has used Title 42 as the basis for almost every one of those removed. So what will it look like if this past year without Title 42? Title 42 has been used, I think the gentleman would agree, more than 1.7 million times during this pandemic.
That's right, 2 years.
In fact, under Secretary Mayorkas' DHS, we've seen more than 2.2 million encounters, and everyone who wasn't turned away under Title 42 were released.
Into the interior of the country.
700,000 releases last year. Now, what about this? In fiscal year 21, Border Patrol encountered 10,700 criminal non-citizens. 3,662 have been arrested thus far in 2022. The combined timeframes include roughly 85 convictions of manslaughter or homicide, 604 sexual offenses, almost 3,000 convictions of illegal drug possession. Based on reports, at least 14 who are on the terrorist watch list. In just the first 5 months of fiscal 22, Border Patrol encountered 525,000 people other than Mexico. In just the first 5 months of fiscal year 22, Border Patrol encountered 421 Chinese nationals. Russia, in just the first 5 months of fiscal year 22, Border Patrol encountered 7,191 Russians out the southwest border. I say all of that to say this. When we don't secure our border, when we turn Border Patrol into a processing organization, we leave our borders wide open for gotaways. And then we have dangerous narcotics and fentanyl pouring into our communities, and we have people dying. And we have gangs. Can the gentleman speak to the deaths and the gangs and the crime and the impact in Virginia, 1,500 miles away from where we're even talking about?
Yeah, the illegal drugs that are pouring in across the country, fentanyl and other dangerous drugs at record levels, is the reason why we had 100,000 overdose deaths a year ago in this country, in 2021. Number one cause of death for individuals between 18 and 45 was not COVID. It was overdose. And as you're on the border trips that I've been on, and again, a couple of those with you, when you meet with the folks who live there, who live on the front lines, and they talk about these illegals, they'll find the carpet shoes. We saw them. You see the carpet shoes and the camos. Once they get picked up by their crime cartel contact and picked up to go wherever they want to go in the interior of the country, you find the carpet shoes, you find the camos left behind. You also find, or you'll have those folks who live there tell you they're coming onto their property, they're knocking on their door, they're threatening them, they're making demands of them. These folks who live on the border, again, they're finding dead bodies. In the previous trip I was on in Arizona, they said they apprehended 30 Chinese nationals on their property, to your point. 160 different countries, not just Central and South America, as if that wasn't enough. But to your point, 160 different countries is making, again, every town a border town, every state a border state. It's a dereliction of duty on behalf of this president's administration, and it's a threat to the national security of our country, to the sovereignty of our country, to the health security of our country, to the financial security of our country. And I appreciate your leadership on this issue.
Well, I thank the gentleman from Virginia. I'm at just over 29 minutes, so I would tell the gentleman from Wisconsin that I'm going to wind down here in the next minute. and appreciate his time, his leadership, his indulgence. I also want to thank the speaker and the staff for being here while we're continuing to talk about this important topic. I'll just close by saying this is a massive national security issue. This is a massive issue of the most important relevance to the safety and well-being of the people that we represent. Why this body is not engaged in just a complete and full and robust review, hearings, oversight, and legislation to ensure that we protect the sovereignty of the United States and enforce the laws of the United States is beyond me. The People's House has an obligation. Article 1 has an obligation to check Article 2 and to demand that those executing the laws actually do so. And so I would just respectfully submit to the Speaker and to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, when are we going to do our job? How many dead migrants found on ranches is enough? How many dead Americans from fentanyl overdoses, fentanyl poisonings to be more accurate, is enough? How much money flowing into the hands of dangerous cartel organizations, transnational organizations turning Mexico into a narco-terrorist state is enough? How much do we have to suffer as a people in this country, as a state in Texas? But again, the migrants who seek to come here, getting sold into the sex trafficking trade, getting abused and dying in the heat along the southern border. How much of that do we have to tolerate before my colleagues on the other side of the aisle wake up? And with that, I will yield back to the gentleman from Wisconsin with great appreciation for all that he does in representing his constituents and for his indulgence.